She walked through the doors and the building shook. Not from anything she had done yet, not from a single point won or a single shot fired, but simply because she had arrived and somehow that was already enough. 10,000 people had been waiting for this moment. And when the doors finally opened and Alex Eala stepped inside the Lindner Family Tennis Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, a roar tore through the air so violently that the stadium workers froze where they stood. But here is the thing that nobody outside of that room could fully understand, the thing that would stop you cold if you knew the whole truth. Just 72 hours before that eruption, she had been sitting alone in a press conference chair, exhausted and defeated, admitting to the world that she had nothing left. So how do you go from that to this? How does a player who just told the entire world she was tired and down walk into a stadium in a foreign country and get treated like a conquering queen before she has touched a single ball? The answer involves something that has never quite happened in the history of women's tennis, and by the time you understand the full picture, you will never look at this story the same way again. Let's go back to where it actually started, because the moment that broke Alex Eala in Toronto was also the moment that began to make her into something the sport had never seen before. The night she walked off center court at SoFi Stadium, the scoreline told a brutal, unforgiving story. 6-4, 6-love, 8 matches across 12 days. Washington, Toronto. The weight of an entire nation carried on 23-year-old shoulders. Belinda Bencic, an Olympic gold medalist who had seen every kind of opponent and every kind of atmosphere, had simply worn her down. And when the final point was played, something in Alexa's face changed in a way that cameras captured, but words struggled to translate. It wasn't devastation exactly. It was something quieter and more dangerous than that. It was the look of someone calculating what comes next. She stood at the microphone and said, "I'm counting my blessings." And in any other athlete's mouth, those words would have sounded like a defeated platitude. But from Alexa, they carried a weight that made the journalists in the room lean forward. Because something in her voice made it clear that she was not finished, she was reorganizing. And then she said something that nobody expected. She said she needed a haircut. She said her nails had grown out. She laughed. And that laugh, that small, exhausted, genuinely human laugh inside all the pressure and defeat and burning stadium lights, is the moment everything changed. Because here is what the numbers will never tell you. The Filipino diaspora that had followed Alex Eala from Washington to Toronto, the fans who had turned a professional tennis tournament in Canada into something that felt more like a homecoming parade, they were not watching for a perfect athlete. They were watching for exactly this, the unguarded moment, the humanity inside the greatness. And when they saw it, when they heard her laugh and talk about her hair, and her nails like an ordinary young woman just trying to get through, the movement that had already transformed 2 cities decided it was ready to transform a 3rd. The question no one could answer yet was whether Alexa herself was ready, and that question would not get resolved without cost. Now, you have to understand what the Cincinnati Open actually means in the landscape of professional tennis, because the seeding number alone does not capture it. When the draw was released and Alex Eala's name appeared as the 17th seed at a WTA 1000 event, the highest seeding of her career at that level, tennis historians began quietly looking things up. 12 months earlier, she had been ranked 143 in the world. 1 year, 143 to 20. First Filipino in history to win a WTA Tour-level singles title. First Southeast Asian ever to lift a WTA 500 trophy. First Filipina to receive a seeding at a Grand Slam when she walked onto the Wimbledon draw at number 29. And now this, the 17th seed in Cincinnati, sitting alongside Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, Jessica Pegula, Coco Gauff, and Mira Andreeva, the women who run the world of tennis. But the number 17 is not even the most important part of this, and this is where the story takes the turn that nobody saw coming. In Toronto, something happened inside the tournament that had never happened before in the event's history. The tournament director added chicken adobo to the menu. Think about what that means. A professional tennis tournament under the pressure of managing one of the biggest draws in women's sports looked around at the audience that had descended on their venue and made a decision that no tournament had ever made for any tennis player. They changed the food. They changed the menu of a major sporting event because the crowd that had arrived for one player was so large, so committed, so culturally present, that the institution itself began to reshape around them. Tournament director Carl Hale called Alex Eala an absolute blessing to the sport of tennis, and he was not speaking metaphorically. He was speaking from the experience of watching 10,000 seats disappear inside 30 minutes the moment her match was announced. He was speaking from the experience of watching a venue that had hosted world champions for decades suddenly feel like it was not big enough to contain what was happening inside it. And now that same phenomenon, that same unstoppable force, had packed its bags and crossed the border into Ohio. But while all of this was building outside, something quieter and more important was happening to Alexa herself during those 72 hours between Toronto and Cincinnati. And this is the part of the story that almost nobody has told correctly. She took 2 days off. She got a haircut. She filed her nails. She did, in her own words, a couple of things just to get her mind off tennis. She reconnected with friends in Cincinnati, and she tried to have fun. That might sound simple. It might sound almost anticlimactic after everything that had been described. But consider what it actually takes to do nothing when 30 million people are watching your every public move. When your phone is flooded with the love and expectations of an entire diaspora. When every tennis commentator on the planet is analyzing your loss frame by frame. The ability to put it down to actually rest instead of just saying you will rest is not a small thing. It is in fact one of the rarest competitive skills in professional sport, and Alex Eala had it. She would need it for what was coming. Because Cincinnati was not going to be a quiet recovery. Cincinnati was not going to be a quiet recovery. Cincinnati was going to ask her a question, a very specific and very serious question. The same question that every great athlete eventually gets asked once the novelty fades and the headlines move on and the real pressure sets in. The question is simple. Can you do it again? The Washington title had rewritten history. The Toronto run 8 matches, impossible crowds. A victory over Alicia Parks that the tennis world described as revenge-fueled and ferocious. A grueling 3-set battle against Katie McNally fought through an injury scare that exposed every layer of her resilience, had proven she was no accident. But the loss to Bencic, the 6-4, 6-love scoreline, the visible exhaustion etched into her face had opened a different conversation. The kind of conversation that surrounds every emerging champion at some point. Was the fatigue catching up? Could she sustain this? Was the phenomenon outpacing the player? McNally herself, after falling to Alexa in Toronto, had posted something on social media that stopped people cold. She said the atmosphere out there was absolutely electrifying and beyond thankful for all the love and kind messages from Filipinos around the world. Think about that. A player who just lost was taking to social media not to process the defeat but to honor the fans of the player who beat her. That does not happen in professional tennis. But Bencic's words after her victory were even more startling because Bencic is not an emotional player. She is precise, experienced, and composed. And yet she stood on court in Toronto and said, "I know most of you were cheering for Alex, but I still have to say it was very nice for me to play in front of you all." A player thanking the opposing crowd, a crowd that in the strictest competitive sense had been working against her. That moment crystallized something that analysts and tournament directors had been struggling to articulate for weeks. The Eala phenomenon was not just about tennis. It was about something that tennis had forgotten it could be. A sport that made ordinary people feel that something sacred was happening right in front of them. That their presence mattered, that their flags and their chants and their pride were not just tolerated but genuinely welcomed by the players on both sides of the net. Coco Gauff, one of the most influential voices in the current generation of women's tennis, said something before the Toronto tournament that landed differently once the crowds arrived. She said the demographic that Alexa is bringing to the sport is so great and that all players should embrace it because they are all benefiting from it. And Gauff was right in a way that was still unfolding in real time. Because what Alexa had done without planning it, without orchestrating it, without any intentional marketing strategy, was remind a global sport that its audience is bigger and more passionate than anyone had bothered to check. Jessica Pegula, who lost to Alexa in the Washington final, turned to the crowd afterward and said, "To all the Filipino fans who came out and supported, you guys are helping grow tennis around the world, and I really appreciate that. A player thanking the fans of the player who just beat her. Two players now. Two opponents, BOMBSHELL and Pagula, both turning toward the Eala crowd with something that looked remarkably like gratitude. That had never happened before. But here is the question that nobody was asking yet. The question that was going to make Cincinnati mean something different from Washington and Toronto. The question that was building quietly beneath all the flags and all the chants and all the historic seedings. What happens when the Eala phenomenon meets Alex Eala, not at full strength, not with the wind at her back and the momentum of a Washington title behind her, but tired, recovering, seated in a draw full of the most dangerous players on the tour, and carrying the weight of a nation that had been screaming her name for 2 straight weeks. That was the real Cincinnati question, and Alexa herself seemed to understand it better than anyone. She had said after Toronto, "I'm taking the lessons that I've had from these 2 weeks and hopefully implementing them even more and in a better way in Cincinnati and New York. Not deflection, not false confidence. A clear-eyed acknowledgement that the process was not finished, that the lessons of defeat were as important as the victories that had preceded it, and that what was coming in Cincinnati and then at the US Open in New York was going to require a version of her that had not fully arrived yet. And this is where the story reaches its most important moment, the detail that most people glossed over and that changes the entire meaning of what happened when she walked into that stadium and the building shook. She had a first-round bye. Her number 17 seeding, earned through every point of the past 18 months, through every ranking climb, through Washington and Wimbledon and Toronto, had given her time. Not a lot, not forever, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to remember who she was before the fatigue set in. Enough to stand inside a stadium packed with red, white, and blue flags and not feel the pressure of immediate performance crushing the moment before it could even become a memory. Because she could be present. She could look out at the Lindner Family Tennis Center, a venue that had hosted legends for decades and had never once changed its menu for any of them, and feel the roar hit her before she had touched a ball, and she could let herself feel it. Alex Eala herself had described it in Toronto in a way that no journalist had improved upon. She said it was hard to describe to other people the feeling of being in that stadium full of fans and all the love, and she was right that it was hard to describe, but she had also said something else that cut deeper. She said she was kind of just a drop in the ocean when it came to Filipinos and their pride for their culture and where they come from. A drop in the ocean. Think about what it takes to look at 10,000 people screaming your name and locate the humility to say that. Think about what it means to carry a movement and recognize that the movement is larger than you, that it would exist whether you won or lost, that the pride filling those stadiums belongs to the people holding the flags and not to the player giving them a reason to wave them. That understanding, that specific and hard-won clarity about who you are inside something much bigger than yourself, is not something that comes from winning. It comes from exactly the kind of defeat she had just survived in Toronto. The loss to BOMBSHELL had not broken her. It had completed a circuit. And now she was standing in Cincinnati. Hair trimmed, nails filed, world ranking at 20, seeded 17th at the highest level of her career with the US Open 12 days away, and the entire diaspora that had followed her from Manila to Washington to Toronto to Ohio, rising to its feet around her, and the question that had haunted every analyst and every rival and every journalist who had been chasing this story for months was finally about to get its answer. Not on the day she walked through the door and heard the roar. That was just the prologue. The real answer was coming inside the lines of a court in Mason, Ohio, where Alex Eala would step up to the baseline, take a breath, and remind the tennis world one more time why an entire nation cannot sleep when she plays. The Eala Express had arrived in Cincinnati, and whatever came next, the score, the draw, the matches, the outcomes, none of it would ever fully capture what was already true before a single point was played. Something historic was unfolding in real time, and you were watching it happen. Real time, and you were watching it happen.